is why there were 50 million women taking Premarin. And then, of course, the Women's Health Initiative came out, which was a randomized controlled trial, not an observational study. And they found the opposite. It was a $1 billion study, 160,000 women, and more heart disease, more stroke, more breast cancer, more blood clots, maybe better hips and less fractures. A problem. And overnight, 50 million women stopped taking hormones, which was a national emergency. And what was interesting when you looked at the data on the Nurses' Health Study, and it's not hard to look at. You just look at the characteristics. The women who took hormones were the ones who were motivated about their health. They went to the doctor. They exercised. They didn't smoke. They ate better. They had more normal body weights. Of course they had less heart disease. It wasn't because of the estrogen, right? They probably would have done even better without it. Meat, same thing. I mean, the meat controversy is, I wish I could spend an hour and a half talking about that. There was a new study came out called the Eat Lancet Commission, which many of you have heard of. I think there are many issues with it. There are a lot of positive things with it, but I think there's a big trend towards saying meat is the enemy, and I think the data just don't really support that. I locked myself in a room for 3 days because I want to live to be 120, and I don't want to eat meat if it's going to kill me, so I want to read the stuff myself, and I read all the papers, and came to some very different conclusions about the data on meat. First of all, this population study was 500,000 people by the NIH and AARP, and they found that people who ate more meat had higher risk of heart disease, cancer, and death. But when you looked at the characteristics of these people, they ate 800 more calories a day, they smoked more, drank more, ate less fruits and vegetables, more processed food, didn't exercise, and weighed more. Why? Well, of course they're going to have more disease, right? It's not because of the meat, it could be something else, right? And when you look at studies, for example, of vegetarians and meat eaters who shopped at health food stores, meaning that the meat eaters probably ate meat in the context of a healthy diet, they had very similar risks of death, meaning they both had their risk reduced in half. I recently interviewed Stan Hazen on my podcast, The Doctor's Pharmacy, who's a scientist at Cleveland Clinic who's linked eating meat to heart disease through a molecule called TMAO that's produced by your bacteria. And they've done studies where they've shown that meat eaters have high levels of this, and that's linked to heart disease. And they've shown that if they feed a vegan a steak, and I don't know how they got them to do that, but if they feed a vegan a steak, then they don't have this TMAO, meaning that their microbiome is different. So I was like, well, I want to find out what my TMAO is because I don't want to die. And so I did my test, and I was like, oh, it's really low. But I eat grass-fed meat in the context of an 80% plant-rich diet. And I eat a ton of fiber and prebiotics. So I didn't have TMAO because I had a different inner garden, right? So it's important to understand what the context is. And there's many other studies that contradict this other study. There's just so much data, right? It's hard to know what to do. These are observational studies still. But if there's no signal, if there's no there, it's unlikely there's a correlation, right? If you don't see an increased risk, it's likely not there. So the PURE study was 135,000 countries, 10 years, 5 continents. There was no increase in mortality or morbidity with animal protein, fat, saturated fat, but higher mortality and death with cereal grains. Vegan, vegetarian, omnivore study, same thing, 245,000 people, no difference in disease or mortality. Food consumption pattern study, 42 countries, not the 7 countries that Ansel Keys did, but 42 countries in Europe. No risk of heart disease with saturated fat, total fat, or animal protein, but there was an increased risk with cereal grains and potatoes. And part of the problem here is we don't have adequate funding. There's $60 billion funded by the government for science, nutrition, science research on drugs, but only $1.5 billion on nutrition research. Now, let's jump to the next topic. So that's just the inherent problems of nutrition research. So even best case scenario, we're kind of screwed, right? Now it gets worse, which is how everything is spun. So the food industry, in large part, is on the take from, nutrition scientists in large part on the take from the food industry. This is from Michelle Simon, published in June. This was a study that came out a couple years ago looking at funding and outcomes of the study. So if the industry funded a study, none of them showed that their product was bad, whether it was Coca-Cola or milk or anything else, right? If it was independently studied, about 40% of the studies showed that there was problems with the product. That soda causes obesity, for example. So it was almost 8 times more likely to have a positive outcome if it was funded by industry. And other studies have shown it's up to 50 times more likely. This is a conflict of interest, a paper that was written in JAMA about nutrition and food industry. And the problem is, the food industry spends about 12 times what the government spends in funding nutrition research. So what happens is it's like the tobacco industry. They sow doubt. They sow confusion. They try to mislead people. They try to, obfuscate the truth. And this is a great article. I read this article, and I'm like, I don't understand this. This is in the Annals of Internal Medicine. Came out a couple years ago. The scientific basis of guideline recommendations on sugar intake, a systematic review. Now, I'm into sugar. Well, I am into sugar, but I write a lot about sugar. And I'm like, I got to read this because this is really important. And what does it say? And it said, guidelines on dietary sugar, meaning to eat less than, whatever is 10% or 5%, depending on your listen of sugar in your diet, doesn't meet the criteria for trustworthy recommendations. They're based on low-quality evidence. Public health officials, when promoting these recommendations, and their public audience, when considering their behavior, should be aware of the limitations of all these studies that sugar is bad. Well, guess who funded the study? I didn't even really understand who ILSI was. It sounds great. It's an International Life Science Institute. It's awesome, right? Well, it's founded by Coca-Cola. And it's supported by General Mills and Hershey's and Kellogg's and Kraft and McDonald's and Monsanto and Nestle and Pepsi, Procter & Gamble, and a bunch of others. And the lead author was on the board of one of the big corn syrup manufacturers. So when you look at this paper and you're the average person, the average doctor, the average newspaper reporter, wow, we should not be worried about sugar. But who is behind it, right? This was a study published last year in Public Health Nutrition looking at sugar-sweetened beverages and the research. Well, there were 133 studies looked at over 12 years. 82% independently funded studies showed there was harm. But 93% of those funded by the industry showed no harm. Right? And it's happening globally. This is an article from the New York Times in Asia's fattest country. I showed a little bit of this last year. How nutrition scientists take money from big food giants. And they have been promoting this product called Milo. If you look on the left, you'll see, or on the left, you'll see this girl about to play volleyball or whatever. And if you go to the developing world, or even anywhere in Asia and even in New Zealand and Australia, this is a big product. This is like Ovaltine. It has the same glycemic index as Coke. Promoted as a healthy sports drink for young kids. And this is the advertising they use to
beat energy gap. Let's do chat moves like James.
Oh, wait. I want to ask, has anybody here heard of a medical condition called the energy gap? Because 4 out of 5 kids have it. Let's hear about it.
Time to beat energy gap. Let's do chat moves like James. Low energy, bottom line, low focus ka, baka energy gap, yeah. 4 out of 5 kids have it. Energize! Start your day the champion way. Healthy energy gap, the energy gap. Drink Milo every day. Milo every day. With your 3 balanced meals.
I think you get the point. I mean, this guy's like the Michael Jackson of the Philippines, right? And they actually were called out for this. And the group at Nestle's, and they're doing some good things, and I'll talk about a little bit about the change in the food industry resulting from our behavior, which is good. We have huge influence on what is done by these companies. They came after the opponents of this, who lived in Malaysia, which is the fattest country in Southeast Asia. And they tried to discredit him, and they tried to promote the benefits of Milo. This was a study that was done by this guy, Tzi Shang, who actually is a nutrition scientist, works for a major university there, but he was also the president of the International Life Science Institute. Here they are again, right? They're all over the place, by the way. And they pay this guy. 1, he was directing this front group for Coca-Cola and the food industry. And 2, he promoted this study, which was so poorly designed. If you look at the funders of the ISLI, it's all this group here, whether it's Monsanto, Pfizer, Procter & Gamble, General Mills, Hershey's, Dow Chemical, DuPont, Bayer, Coca-Cola. And they looked at if kids drank Milo,